Canada's job picture continues to get worse, and who is to blame? Trudeau. And I hate blaming him for every single thing that we're talking about this week, but since it's job and immigration specific, he is the one directly to blame. He knows what's going on. On top of that, the UN has accused Canada of basically running a modern day slavery scam, which we've been talking about as well. But good news is Canada's reputation globally is already on the decline, and with Trudeau it continues to get worse. But Bloomberg luckily brought on one of their experts, an absolute idiot, to lead us off with breaking down some of the information on the jobs report. Some of the stuff he said was so stupid I wanted to jump off a bridge, but I watched it anyways. Let's get into it.
Canada losing 2,800 positions during the month. Economists were expecting 25,000 jobs to be created. The numbers point to an economy that is struggling to create new employment, while the unemployment rate itself did not rise, as some on Bay Street thought it might, holding at 6.4% versus a 6.5% estimate. That number is still well above where it sat at the start of last year.
Don't worry, we'll get into why it didn't rise.
The numbers likely leave the Bank of Canada on track to continue cutting interest rates. Remember, Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem lowered the policy rate by another 25 basis points in July. One of the questions to ask with a report like this is whether or not the job market is cooling at a level that would make this a so-called soft landing or something worse. Let's kick off our coverage with Earl Davis. He's head of fixed income and money markets at BMO Global Asset Management. Earl, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Your immediate reaction to the Canadian jobs report?
My immediate reaction was that it was weak, but my secondary reaction is that the number's actually better than it looks. And the reason why that
Okay, why don't you break that down for us, Earl?
is the mix between part-time and full-time. There was a significant increase in full-time jobs, significant decrease in part-time jobs that resulted in this overall loss. So it tells me, you'd rather have a full-time job than a part-time job. So it's actually a little bit better than expected. My other takeaway from this,
Nice, Earl. Where are those full-time jobs coming from and being created?
There's two important elements that I look at from a Bank of Canada perspective. One is, what's your unemployment rate? Above 6.5% unemployment, they accelerate the pace of eases. We stayed at 6.4. So that's on course, as you said, on track for 3 cuts possibly this year.
Stayed at 6.4, but we're actually higher. Anyways.
The other number I look at is wage inflation. The Bank of Canada not only wants to see that below 5%, they want to see it trending down towards 3%. We had wage inflation that was lower than last month's print, 5.6 to, I think it's 5.2, this one, but it's still above 5%. That's a magic number as well, too, from a Bank of Canada perspective.
Magic number in terms of a so-called soft landing scenario?
Yeah, there's a magic number from two fronts. Yes, that so-called soft landing, but earlier this week when we had all the volatility in risk assets and equity markets, there was some talk of a 50 basis point ease by the Fed, which puts a 50 basis point ease on the table for the Bank of Canada at any one of their meetings. That is not on the table now. But if we see either wage inflation go below 5% or the unemployment rate above 6.5%, I think you're going to get some talk of a possible 50 basis point cut.
All right, let's break into those numbers a little bit because Earl is absolutely, we'll get into the stuff that really made me mad later on. But okay, private sector employment declines. Here we are. Awesome. That's exactly what you want to hear when you get a jobs report, because guess what? Private sector employees fell by 42,000. But according to Earl, it's good because we increased more full-time jobs. Yeah, public sector rose by 41,000. Public sector means that's government spending. This is 100% either debt or tax money that's being spent to create jobs. So they're fake. They're not real. It's parasitic. It's not productive for the actual economy. The unemployment rate was unchanged at 6.4%. What nobody is talking about in their actual numbers is, it's unchanged in July. Yeah, but guess what? It's actually increasing in recent immigrants because we are bringing them over at a rate that we are not able to absorb them into the job market. So then what happens? It keeps wages low. This is the real thing. Labor force participation rate falls, which means the amount of people who are looking for a job has gone down, which means unemployment didn't actually stay the same. More people gave up on looking for a job. So this number didn't actually stay the same. Unemployment went up. More people were taken out of the statistics. So that's a manipulated statistic to make things look like they're fine. And then what did he talk about? Was wage increases. Well, guess what? The only reason wage increases are happening is because they're high-paying government jobs that are being printed out of nowhere on taxpayer dollars. They can't cut rates based on those statistics. Yeah, they're manipulated statistics and the government is actually making them worse. Let's listen to what this freaking dummy has to say.
There have been some suggestions that you're not seeing widespread layoffs across the country. The people who have a job have been able to hold on to that job. It's just that there's not a lot of new job creation. So does this data reflect that to a certain degree, in your opinion?
On a standalone basis, yeah, but let's not forget about inflation. So let's go back to the Bank of Canada. They said neutral interest rates, where it's neither restricted nor stimulative on the economy, is 2.75. We are presently at 4.5. So by definition, that's restrictive.
Hey, did you like the video yet? If you haven't liked it, it helps me get my content in front of more people. It's a free way to support the channel. If you like what we talk about here, feel free to subscribe. Love to have you on board. Let's get back to the video.
So then the question is, why are they not easing to neutral faster? Only one reason: inflation. So when I say the wage inflation in the employment number, that's a representation of inflation in employment. And that's what they want to see decelerate. If all of a sudden we go from 5.2 to 3.9 in wage inflation, like we're seeing in CPI, that lowering, they will accelerate their pace of eases.
Okay, so wage inflation is increasing due to government job printing, and now we can't cut rates, or we are slower to cut rates because the government is printing. There you go.
First of all, people who are just coming out of school right now are having a reasonably tough time getting a job. Even summer jobs has been a bit of a challenge for people. So youth unemployment has been notably high. We've talked in recent months about for new Canadians, right? Immigration is a key part of the Canadian growth story, but there are a lot of people who are struggling to find employment. So there's a bit of an imbalance there when it comes to the overall employment rate, depending on who you are. And then one of the interesting things with this...
Also, I believe youth unemployment considers anybody under the age of 25. Correct me in the comments below if that's not correct. So it's not just like 18 and under, it's 25 and under.
Report is you're seeing more government jobs created. And over the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen a huge surge in the government employment picture. But I wonder if that can mask what's
a huge surge in government employment picture
actually happening with the economy. How do you feel about an economy that is creating a lot of government or public sector employment? Is that a good or a bad thing?
It depends on what seat you're in. So from an economic, purely economy perspective, I would say it is not a bad thing. And the reason why, those are typically higher wage jobs, which means there's more disposable income. It means people spend more, keeps the economy going. From a sustainable perspective, it's not the way you want to go, because more government jobs means more taxes. It means they have to increase the revenues to be able to support it. That's why you want to be able to be supportive of the private sector. You want the private sector to lead jobs, without a doubt, not the public sector. But it's
the fact that he's running cover for the government by saying like, well, you know, it's not a bad economic thing because we are going to make these public roles, which are not productive, but then they're going to buy stuff. So don't worry, I'm going to buy 6 refrigerators off my credit card, but because I can fit so much more food in my refrigerators, it doesn't matter that I bought all 6 of those refrigerators on my credit card through debt.
It's a balance, and it's complicated. And this is why I do think the governor is doing a very good job, because you still cannot take your eye off inflation. Even though it's declined and we're not talking about it as much, you cannot take your eye. And that's why they're being, I would say, measured in their approach of easing. And I expect that to continue.
With economists like these, who needs enemies? Because this guy just ran cover on how the government job printing is increasing the wage inflation and how the government job printing is somehow good. I understand that he followed it with saying like, oh, you know, long term, it's not great. You want to support the private sector. Yeah, of course we do. They're the only productive roles. We did have this report about how the UN reports think that the temporary foreign worker program that we've been talking about is basically modern day slavery. Let's get into it.
Well, a new United Nations report is criticizing Canada's temporary foreign workers program. And for the latest details on this story, let's bring in CTV's Colton Prale. We appreciate the update as always. And I'm just reading some of the criticism from some UN officials. One official denounced Canada's foreign worker program as, quote, a breeding ground for contemporary forms of slavery. Not mincing words there. Tell us about this report.
Absolutely not, Jimmy. Yeah, this is a report from the Special Rapporteur on contemporary slavery, I should say, for the UN. And he came to Canada last year. He visited a number of different cities, talked with a number of different officials, governments. He talked with industry, with labor groups, with temporary workers themselves. And he put together a large report across the board, but a large section of it focuses on the temporary foreign worker program. And as you point out, yes, refers to it as a form and a breeding ground for contemporary slavery. Really.
So first of all, the UN sucks. It's just another government body that is unelected, nobody cares about. But it's another group coming in and being like, hey, Canada, what you got going on here is pretty whack.
The main focus of this report is specifically on closed work permits or employer-specific work permits. And what this is it ties temporary workers to one specific employer. And this report says that the creation of those agreements fosters an environment where there is dependency for the temporary workers on their employer, but it also gives their employer controls over things like their workers' housing, their healthcare, their migration status. And the carry-on effect from that is that there are multiple reports of abuses, whether that be in working conditions, whether that be physical abuse, sexual abuse, overworked, wage theft, controlling documents or keeping documents so that workers can't leave, can't report any of these abuses. There's fear to do so. It also talks about some of the challenges that we've seen as far as a lack of PPE and hazardous conditions, housing where it's vastly overcrowded. There are dozens of people using a single washroom, for example. It is a number of issues fostered in large part by this power imbalance. And so the report focuses specifically on that and calls for an end of that type of work agreement.
So, ironically, this is the type of work agreement I think we should have. However, what's been happening is the temporary foreign worker program is being abused to such a level that there is essentially zero government oversight, because there's hundreds of thousands of temporary foreign workers who are coming over with, the LMIAs and all these other things. So the government can't monitor all these jobs. So those types of roles, which are traditionally the roles that people have always used for the temporary foreign worker programs, are the ones that we need. Often Canadians are not filling those jobs. Nobody can catch the actual abuses that's happening to these poor people who are coming over for jobs and careers, and they are getting absolutely taken advantage of by these corporations because of the other corporations that are abusing it even worse and selling the permits and these other things. So ironically, the one that we should have, in the agriculture sphere that should be protected, that we need to have, so, part of our food supply, is the one that should be looked into the most, monitored the most, and protected the most. And they're saying, oh, it's not being monitored and it's being abused, it needs to be closed down. That's the one we need.
But it also calls out that the way the program is structured in Canada doesn't really work. There's an issue at its core with the federalism. The jurisdictional neglect is how this report phrases it, where the federal government runs this program through 3 different ministries. But if there are ever any issues for the workers themselves about their health, about labor conditions, about employment, they have to go to the provinces with whom they're working. And there were multiple instances where the provinces didn't try to resolve those issues because they felt like it was outside of their jurisdiction, even though that's not the case.
What does the report say when it comes to, making these workers permanent resident status and how necessary it is to end a lot of this exploitation? Were there any recommendations in that regard?
Absolutely. That is one of the key recommendations, actually, is but if you can give these workers a pathway to permanent residency, it opens up healthcare and options for these people in a way that they don't currently have. They wouldn't have to go through private insurance provided by the employers. They would have access to the Canadian healthcare system, and that alone would be incredibly beneficial. But it also points to the fact that this work, in large part, is happening year over year. It's so frequently in the fruit and agriculture sector, it's not going anywhere. And so by opening up a permanent residency pathway for these workers, you could actually solve some of the labor shortages in Canada. Specifically, it talks about how the absence, I should say, of that pathway to permanent residency increases the vulnerabilities.
So a lot of people don't know this, but our PR number, which is the 500,000 goal that we have now, does not include any of the, LMAs, the temporary foreign workers, the student visa people who come over. That doesn't include that in the 500,000. But what if we put a pause on immigration and all of these people who are TFWs right now, we get the background checks and they're already in Canada. So they start to be the ones who do get worked into that 500,000. And now we stop bringing over 1.3 million. And then we find a way. Hey, you came over at this 1.3. You didn't qualify. You scammed your way through in a bad school program. You got to go. We've got 500,000 spots. I don't even think it should be 500,000. I think it should be back to 250,000. So let's cut it to 250. What we don't need is more Tim Hortons workers, so Tim Hortons can save a couple bucks. Thank you so much for making it this far in the video. You guys absolutely rock. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and have a great rest of your day.